I moved to Washington, D.C. in September of 1980.
I moved to Washington in the summer of 1983.
I was born in Washington, D.C. I never had to move there.
I had graduated from college in June of 1980 and went to Washington with my roommate, my college roommate, June, and the two of us were looking for work.
I moved to Washington because I was starting 1 year of volunteer service.
I was working for a company called AMI, and that company's offices were in Bethesda, Maryland.
I was working where I am still today at the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation. It's called the PBGC, and the PBGC is a federal agency that insures private pension plans.
I worked for a consulting firm in D.C.
We had a nanny come to the house to take care of you. So I went to work, and I got to work probably at about 8:45, 8:30, 8:45.
I was at work when the plane crashed into the Pentagon. I remember on the way driving into work that morning, I had heard the two planes had hit the buildings in New York City. And I remember turning off the radio because I couldn't believe what was happening.
So interestingly, I was actually not in D.C. I was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana at a work meeting.
I couldn't believe what was happening, and I didn't understand why it was happening. And of course I was worried because nobody really knew what more was happening. At the same time, we were learning what was happening.
I was with other people, and we walked into this hotel lobby where the meeting was, and they quickly had a TV screen up, and we were just all sort of trying to figure out what happened, and we couldn't quite imagine that it was a big plane.
Probably your dad, who was in Columbus. He wasn't in D.C. at the time, so he was calling to make sure that we were okay.
I think I tried to call my wife Tamar, who was at a business meeting in Louisiana that day, and I probably tried to call my mom and dad in Buffalo.
We're used to always calling our family in Israel to see how they are, and that day they were all calling us to see how we were, and we're like, wait, it's not supposed to work this way. Like, we call them, not the other way around when bad things happen.
One of my coworkers had called because she was sitting in traffic on the highway on her way to work, kind of stuck in a very late rush hour that day. And she called the front desk. She was in a bit of a panic because she was sitting on Shirley Highway and saw the plane in her rearview mirror hit the Pentagon and explode. Another one of my coworkers was married to an American Airlines flight attendant, so he was trying to find out where she was that day. And as it turns out, she was fine, but her very best friend was one of the flight attendants on Flight 77, and that was actually the plane that hit the Pentagon.
The federal government decided after the Pentagon was hit that the government would close and all federal agencies, including mine, would close and we should all go home. We were outside on the sidewalk, everybody trying to understand what had happened and sharing whatever information we had. And we were hearing rumors that maybe the Capitol building was going to be hit, or maybe the subway was going to be hit. And I remember some people decided to walk home because they didn't feel safe taking the subway home.
Where our house was in Bethesda, it was in the flight path for Washington National. And immediately after 9/11, Washington National Airport stopped operating. No flights were allowed in and out of National at that time. But instead what we heard all day and all night were the fighter jets that were patrolling the airspace around DC.
So I remember in the following days, and probably a couple of weeks, there were Army guards at every corner in Washington, D.C., kind of just standing watch. So at the corner outside of our building, there was an Army Jeep and maybe 3 or 4 officers at every intersection, just directing traffic and making sure everything was okay.
Immediately, I had the challenge that other people didn't have of I had to figure out how to get home from Louisiana. So I drove to Houston and was on one of the first planes that was able to fly out after the crash. So the immediate thing was sort of how to get back, and it was whether Michael offered to meet me halfway, sort of trying to figure that out. And then sort of being on one of those first planes. I pulled up to the airport and I saw a plane, and it was just like my stomach kind of sank because I realized how big it was. Because it's like the first plane I had seen since the incident, and it just sort of struck me how big it was. But it didn't. I was okay. The rest of the family was sort of where they all should be. But you did have that instinct, like you wanted to sort of pin down where everybody you cared about was and make sure everybody was okay.
I'll never forget just my disbelief of what was happening.
Especially in the few weeks afterwards, I definitely noticed that people were just a lot kinder to each other. Just knowing that we weren't safe, that I had an 18-month-old baby that would grow up in a world that was not safe, that's what lasts. That's what stays with me.